So let's now talk to that API route from our frontend. Here we got the contact form, and it's probably here where we want to talk to our backend. First of all, we need to add a function which is triggered when the form is submitted. So I'll add a new nested function in this component, the send message handler function, which will get the default event object and which should call event prevent default to prevent the browser default where we would basically reload the page because the browser automatically sends a request, which we don't want here. So I'll prevent that default and then connect my send message handler to onSubmit, like this. Now in here, we want to send a HTTP request. We want to send a HTTP request to our API route. And we can do this with the good old fetch function, which is built into the browser. We could also use a third-party package like Axios. Now here we need to pass in the URL to which we want to send a request. We can omit the domain because we're using an API route which will be hosted by the same server as our pages are hosted on. So we can just add an absolute path to /API/contact. /API/contact because we named the file contact in that special API folder. Now we also need to pass that second argument to fetch to configure the request because we don't want to use the default, which would be a GET request with no data, but instead we want a POST request with the submitted data. So I'll set this here to POST and then also add a body. Now for the body, we need to extract the entered data first of all. And we can use refs for that, as we did it before in the course, or to mix things up here, we use state and two-way binding. And I'll do the latter simply just to see this alternative. So I'll not set the body for now, and instead in the contact form component, I'll now use the useState hook, which is imported from React, to manage state for the different inputs. Initially an empty string for every input, but then here we have the entered email state and set entered email, and I replicate this twice to also have my entered name state and the set entered name state updating function and the entered message state and set entered message. Alternatively, we could also use one state, which is an object and has an email name and message field. That is up to you, and that is just standard React. So now we got that. Now we need to bind this. So here on this first input, I'll now set value equal to entered email to pass the currently stored value in this state back into the input, but then also add the onChange prop to listen to changes. And here I'll add a quick inline function where we get the default event object automatically and then call send entered email and set this equal to event.target.value. That will give us access to the currently entered value. And we can now repeat that on all the inputs. So here on this input for the name, it's the entered name which we want to bind, and on change we want to set the entered name therefore. And for the text area we can do the same. Value is set to entered message, entered message, and we set the entered message. So for text area you also set the value prop. You don't add it between the text area tags, just to make this clear. So now I'm using this two-way binding to have the entered data in those state values. And therefore now, when we add a body here to our outgoing request, we want to JSON stringify an object with that entered data. Now we can also add client-side validation here and simply check the entered values before they are submitted and possibly show an error message to the user. But we already have some basic validation because we added the required attribute here. So that will make sure that it can't be empty anyways. We should add this to the text area as well. And we already do also validate on the server, as we should, and hence I won't add another layer of validation here. But you could, because of course with client-side JavaScript-based validation, you have full control over which error messages you might want to show and so on. But I will omit it here. It's optional. And hence here I'll just construct the object which will be sent to the server, and that is an object converted to JSON, which has an email field which contains the entered email, which has a name field which contains the entered name, and which has a message field which contains the entered message. And you have to make sure that the field names you choose here, email name and message, of course map the field names you expect in your API route function. Here I'm trying to extract email name and message, so these should be the identifiers I set here, email name and message. With that, we're setting this. Last but not least, I'll also add a header and set the content type header to application JSON to make the backend aware of the fact that this request will carry JSON data and hence it can be parsed correctly by the backend. This now sends the request. We're not doing anything else, not working with the response or handling errors, but the request should be sent now. And therefore, let's now save everything and let's give it a try. Let's reload this contact page and fill out this form with some dummy data. Does this work? And click Send Message. Now we don't get any feedback here, but if we go back to the terminal where we run our dev server, so where all the server-side code executes, we should see this output. This log, which comes from our API route. Here, where we log the message. So the data does arrive successfully on the server. And now that that's the case, we only got two main steps left, two main tasks which we have to tackle. We probably want to show some feedback to the user on the front end, like a notification when the request is on its way and when it succeeded or when it failed. And of course, we want to store the data in the actual database. Now let's start with the database in the next lecture and then add better client-side feedback thereafter.